So for this lesson on 6-2, we're doing special right triangles. If you're given this triangle, this right triangle, and you know that two of the sides are both 10, A and B are both 10, then you should know that this is an isosceles triangle. If you wanted to try to find the length of the hypotenuse, so we're going to tell you again, the legs are 10. If you wanted to find the length of the hypotenuse, you'd use the Pythagorean theorem. So take a minute and do that. You might want to pause this and then come back. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So I've got 10 squared, which is 100. 10 squared again is 100, which is C squared. 200 equals C squared. When I square root 200, I know that 200 is formed by 100 times 2. So then C becomes 10 radical 2. You're going to start to notice some patterns in these particular isosceles right triangles. So I want you to do number 1 and number 2. In number 2, we're going to tell you that the length of AB is 5. So pause this now or go through it, but I want you guys to get the answers with Pythagorean theorem for 1 and 2. Okay, so for F, we know this is going to be F. We know that 7 squared plus 7 squared equals F squared. 49 plus 49 equals F squared. 98 equals F squared, which means when I square root 98, which is just going to be radical 49 times radical 2, then F is going to be 7 rad 2. On this side, if I know that one of these legs is 5, this other leg has to be 5. When I try to find B, I'm going to get 5 squared, or 25, plus 5 squared again, which is 25, equals B squared. 50 equals B squared. 50, I know, is just rad 25 rad 2, which means B is just 5 rad 2. So what do you notice in all these particular triangles? And it should be that if you have a leg of a 45, 45, 90 triangle, then in order to get the hypotenuse, you simply multiply the leg by radical 2 to get hypotenuse. So this happens to be a pattern that in any 45, 45 right triangle, if the lengths of the legs take x, then the length of the hypotenuse always takes x multiplied by rad 2. And that's going to happen all the time. Okay, so 45, 45, 90s, x, x, x rad 2. Well, we want you now for 4 and 5 to solve for x, which is a leg, using the Pythagorean theorem, and put that into simplest radical form. Now feel free to pause this, or you can just watch me go through it. So on 4, I know that both of the legs are x, so x squared plus x squared equals 12 squared, which is 144. 2x squared equals 144. If I divide out 2 from both sides, I get x to be 72. And if I simplify 72 as a radical, it's 36 2, which in this case, x is going to be 6 rad 2. So a leg is going to be 6 rad 2. When I take a look at 5, if I call this one leg x, this leg has to be x, and I'll do it again. X squared plus x squared equals 10 squared, which is 100. 2x squared equals 100. Divide both sides by 2. X squared equals 50. Simplest radical form, x equals 5 rad 2. What do you notice here? How are we getting from the hypotenuse to the leg? And hopefully what you're noticing is that if you have the hypotenuse, you simply divide it by 2 and multiply it by the square root of 2 to get the leg. L-E-G. There we go. Okay, so what's going to happen here for your pattern is you're going to have the hypotenuse. If you get the hypotenuse being x, then what you need to do to find each leg is you're going to divide x by 2 and then multiply that answer by a rad 2. Divide x by 2 and multiply it by a rad 2. Okay, we can show you why this works. It goes back to rationalizing, but when we get to the next problem, we'll take a look at that. So we need to find x and find y. Well, we know it's a 45, 45, 90, so x should be easy. X is just 4. And if x is 4, if the legs are 4, the hypotenuse is just 4 rad 2. Because don't forget, in any sort of isosceles right triangle, I guess I'm going to come right down here. In any isosceles right triangle, the legs always take x, and the hypotenuse takes x rad 2. Make your life easy. So in 8, you're given the hypotenuse. So you're given the x rad 2 side, which means the sides themselves just take x, which means it's 8 and 8. So x and y are both 8 here. Here's that shortcut that we talked about. If you're given the x rad 2 side being 8 rad 2, how do you get x all alone? Well, you divide both sides out by rad 2. Anything divided by itself is just 1. And there you go. X is 8. On 9, again, I don't like the fact that these have x's and y's on it. What I'm going to do is just kind of cross these things out. And I'm going to write the legs always take x. I guess I didn't have to cross out one of them. And the hypotenuse is x rad 2. The shortcut basically says to you, if the hypotenuse is x rad 2, all that has to be done is you divide the hypotenuse in half and you multiply it by a rad 2, which means each leg should be 9 divided by 2 multiplied by a rad 2. Or feel free to say 4.5 rad 2 for each of the legs. Let's show you why this works. Let me get some room. When you have x rad 2 being equal to 9, how do you solve for x? You divide both sides by the square root of 2. Well, anything divided by itself goes away. The problem here is you can never divide by a square root. You have to rationalize this, if you remember from last year, which means to rationalize, you need to multiply both top and bottom by rad 2. So what's going to happen is you're now going to get x equals 9 rad 2 over rad 4. But remember, rad 4 is just plain old 2. Any square root times itself is just 2. Or is just itself, I should say. In this case, it's just 2. So if you want to do the math to figure out why you divide by 2 and multiply by rad 2, go for it. Or just take the hypotenuse, cut it in half, and multiply it by a rad 2. Okay. So here are a couple of questions to do. Again, don't forget, anytime you are in an isosceles right triangle, you know that the legs always take the value of x, the hypotenuse takes the value of x radical 2. So which represents the length of a diagonal of a square whose sides are 5 units long? So we're talking about a square. If the sides of a square are 5 all the way around and a square has all right angles, if we want to drop in the diagonal, well, remember, the legs always take x. It's an isosceles right triangle. And the diagonal in this case is the hypotenuse, which is x rad 2. Your answer is B, 5 rad 2. Let's take a look at this next problem, and then that's it, and you should be good to go. If the perimeter of a square is 8 rad 2, what's the length of the diagonal? Now be careful. Perimeter of the square. If the perimeter is 8 rad 2, perimeter is found by adding all 4 sides. So that means if I've got 4 sides added together to give me 8 rad 2, each side must be 2 rad 2. Right? Because if I've got 2 rad 2 all the way around, I've got a perimeter of 8 rad 2. Well, what happens when I draw on my diagonal? Here's my right angle. The legs take length of x. The hypotenuse takes x rad 2. So if my legs are already 2 rad 2, and I'm trying to get into x rad 2, I am going to have to multiply my leg 2 rad 2 by a rad 2. What I come up with here is going to be then 2 rad 4, excuse me, or just 2 times 2, and my diagonal is going to be 4. Okay, so again, the most important thing to remember on all, let me try to get this full page. The most important thing to remember is knowing this right here, that in an isosceles right triangle, the legs take length of x, and the hypotenuse is x rad 2. Alrighty, good luck on the homework.